Imagine you're driving past a construction site. That hive of activity, the cranes reaching for the sky. Ever wonder who exactly is making that building happen and how?
Yeah, it's pretty complex when you stop and think about it.
Well, today, we're not just watching the cranes, we're diving deep into the intricate world of construction projects.
And we're using a really insightful chapter about these projects and the people involved as our source today.
Oh,
It gives a great look into how these massive undertakings are managed, really from start to finish.
exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the essential components. We're talking about what fundamentally defines a construction project, why it absolutely needs careful management,
Right.
and who all the key players are. Think of it as getting the blueprint to understanding how our physical world gets built. We'll be looking at this from multiple angles, so hopefully you'll get some aha moments. Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is a project in the construction world?
Well, the chapter gives us some excellent starting points, like building a new college library. That's a project.
Okay.
But the ongoing business of the construction company that built it, that's different. That's an operation, not really a project in the same sense.
Right, one has an end date, the other just keeps going.
Exactly. Even something smaller, like, say, a homeowner adding a bathroom or maybe building some shelves in the garage, those count as projects too.
So what's the common thread then?
There are a few key things, actually.
Okay.
First, there's always a defined goal, an objective. The source calls it the deliverable.
The deliverable, like what you actually get at the end.
Precisely. You're setting out to create something specific, building a house, installing an irrigation system. There's a clear end result you're aiming for.
Gotcha. And it's not routine, you said.
Right. It's not something that's done on repeat, generally.
Yeah.
Building that specific house happens once, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the company's regular admin work just continues.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, the source points out that bigger projects often have smaller projects within them.
Like layers.
Yeah, kind of. Like the roofing job is its own mini project within the larger house building project. Or the painting.
Yeah.
Smaller goals adding up to the big one.
That makes sense, like mini missions within the main quest. So goal, not routine. What else?
Then there's the element of time. Every project has a definite beginning and a definite end.
A deadline.
Yep, and a schedule to follow to get there. Now, that timeline could be pretty short, like that bathroom renovation. Or incredibly long. Decades, even, for something huge like planning and building a power station.
Oh, decades. Okay, time is key. Anything else?
And we can't forget resources. Projects always use resources. Labor, money, equipment.
Right, the stuff you need to actually do it.
Exactly, and all of that needs careful tracking. There are budgets set, costs are monitored. It's like its own little temporary economy.
And someone has to manage all that, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. In construction, you usually have a general contractor or maybe a construction manager on bigger jobs who's the main coordinator pulling all that physical work together.
Okay, so we know what a project is. Defined goal, specific time frame, uses resources, not routine. But why can't we just wing it? Why is this whole field of project management so critical?
Well, that's where it gets really crucial, especially in construction, because you're constantly trying to balance three things. How well the work is being done.
Quality.
Right. How much it costs.
A budget.
And how long it's taking.
Schedule.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Quality, cost, schedule. It's a triangle, really. And you've got the owner with their expectations, the designer with their vision, and then the general contractor, the GC, who has to actually make it happen on the ground.
And they all have a management role.
They do, at different stages. But once the actual building starts, the GC is really the one steering the ship day to day.
Making sure it's finished on schedule, stays within the agreed budget, and meets the required quality. That sounds like a huge undertaking.
It absolutely is.
It's not just about knowing the trades, the physical work itself, is it?
Not at all. The chapter really emphasizes this. Successful contractors need strong management and organizational skills just as much, if not more, than just trade expertise.
So how do they manage it all? What tools do they use?
They're using everything from IT systems, software for tracking, to regular team meetings, incredibly detailed records, often with photos.
Oh, documentation is key.
Hugely important. Frequent site walkthroughs, careful ordering and tracking of materials, requisitioning. It's all about communication and keeping everyone informed, making sure the work lines up with what was agreed in the contract.
Sounds like a constant juggling act. What kind of unexpected challenges do they typically run into?
Oh, there are always potential curveballs. Finding enough skilled workers can be a major hurdle sometimes.
Yeah, you hear about labor shortages.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Then you have the ever-present possibility of material costs suddenly going up.
Inflation, supply
Yeah.
chains. Yeah.
Right. And of course, the weather. You
Yeah.
can plan all you want, but a bad storm can throw a schedule right out the window.
Ooh.
And, the level of management needed really depends. Are you the main GC overseeing everything, or a subcontractor just focused on the electrical work? And how big and complex is the project itself? It all varies.
So it's a complex dance with a lot of moving parts. Let's zoom out a bit then and talk about the people doing the dancing. Who are the key players in this construction orchestra?
Well, what's fascinating here, and the source points this out, is that construction teams are usually temporary.
Temporary.
Yeah, they come together for a specific project, do the job, and then, once it's complete, they often disband and move on to new projects, maybe with different people.
Interesting. So who are the main groups?
The source identifies 3 main groups, or teams, each with their own distinct roles and responsibilities. You've got the owner's team, the designer's team, and the contractor's team.
Owner, designer, contractor, the big three.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Although, even though these roles are generally defined, the specific contracts can sometimes shift responsibilities around a bit.
Okay. So the paperwork matters.
Definitely. The contract's in place, the owner's specific needs. It can lead to some adjustments in how roles are carried out. But at the end of the day, the fundamental goal for everyone involved is the same.
Which is?
To deliver a finished building or structure that meets what the owner wanted and, crucially, complies with all the necessary rules and regulations.
Okay, let's delve into that first team then, the owner. What are they responsible for bringing to the table? What's their role?
The owner is really the one who starts the whole process. They have the initial idea or the need for the project.
The vision caster?
Sort of, yeah. They establish the project goals, figure out the overall budget, the timeline they're hoping for.
So the big picture stuff.
Exactly. They also usually secure the land, arrange the financing, which is obviously critical, and then they're the ones who select many of the other key players, like the design team and often the main contractor.
And the chapter makes an important distinction here, doesn't it, between public and private owners?
It does, yeah. And it's a key difference, mainly boiling down to where the money comes from.
Okay.
Public owners are governmental bodies, could be local, state, federal, and also some public institutions like universities or hospitals. Their projects are paid for with public funds.
Taxes, bonds, that sort of thing.
Right. Think of a new community college library or a public highway. And because it's taxpayer money, these projects usually have more layers of oversight.
Like what?
Well, often things like public bidding processes, where lots of different contractors can submit bids to compete for the job. They might also have to stick to more stringent regulations.
Makes sense. You want to ensure public funds are being used responsibly. So what about private owners then?
Private owners, they generally have more flexibility. They're using their own capital or maybe getting construction loans from a bank.
So individuals, developers.
Exactly. Individuals building a house, property developers putting up an office building, businesses expanding. Since it's private money, they usually have more freedom in how they choose and hire their contractors. They aren't typically bound by those public bidding rules.
Okay. So on a bigger project, who else might be part of the owner's team? Besides just the owner. It can't just be one person, usually, right?
Oh, definitely not on larger projects. You'll often see a dedicated project manager or maybe a business manager coordinating things on the owner's behalf.
Like the owner's right hand?
Kinda, yeah. Then there might be someone specifically overseeing the contractor's work quality and progress. That role could be filled by the designer or a separate construction manager, or sometimes a clerk of the works, especially on public jobs.
Okay.
And then, of course, you'll likely have attorneys sorting out the legal side, accountants managing the money, insurance agents making sure everything's covered.
The support network.
Absolutely. And the financiers, the
Yeah.
lenders, providing the actual funds. Plus, depending on the project, you might have input from the eventual end users, real estate agents, maybe even marketing teams involved early on.
Wow, it sounds like a pretty extensive network even before a shovel hits the ground.
Okay, let's move on to the second key team, the designers. Who are they and what's their function?
Right, the designers. Often you'll hear them called the AE team. That stands for architect engineer.
AE. Got it.
They're responsible for the planning, the actual design, and also what's called construction administration. So overseeing things once building starts.
And architects do buildings, engineers do.
Generally, architects focus more on the buildings themselves, the look, the function, the space. Engineers tend to handle the infrastructure, like roads or bridges, and the technical systems within buildings, structural, electrical, mechanical.
And they're licensed professionals.
Yes, absolutely. Architects and engineers are licensed professionals. They're hired by the owner and are ultimately accountable to the owner.
So it's much more than just drawing up pretty blueprints, right? Oh, much more. The chapter emphasizes that architects and engineers are fundamentally problem solvers.
How so?
They have the expertise to create designs that not only meet the owner's goals, but also work within the budget, fit the schedule, and comply with all the rules, building codes, zoning laws, accessibility standards, all of that.
A lot to juggle there, too.
Definitely. And the architect's role often extends beyond just design. They might help the owner evaluate bids from contractors, advise on hiring the GC, and then act as the owner's representative during the construction phase.
What does that involve, acting as the owner's rep?
It means handling things like reviewing and approving the contractor's applications for payment.
Making sure they get paid for work done.
Right. Monitoring their progress against the schedule and the quality standards. Reviewing submittals, that's the information the contractor provides on the specific materials and equipment they plan to use.
So checking if the light fixtures are the right ones, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And answering questions from the contractor about the drawings or specifications. Clarifying the design intent.
Okay. And who are the key players within the designer's team on a bigger job?
Well, you'll typically have a principal in charge, sort of the senior person with overall responsibility for the firm's involvement.
The boss.
Pretty much. Then there's usually a project architect who leads the design development, produces the main construction documents, and is often the primary day-to-day contact for the owner.
Okay.
You'll also likely have a project manager on the design side, focused on keeping the design work on schedule and budget, maybe doing site visits during construction, helping resolve issues with the contractor. And then a job captain is often crucial.
Job captain, what do they do?
They're really focused on coordinating all the different drawings, making sure the structural plans work with the electrical plans, work with the architectural plans, and so on. Especially important when you bring in outside consultants.
Ah, right, the consultants. The architect doesn't usually do everything themselves, do they?
No, definitely not on complex projects. They bring in specialists. Well, structural engineers are key for the building's frame. Civil engineers for the site work, drainage, utilities, electrical and mechanical engineers for power, lighting, plumbing, HVAC systems.
The guts of the building.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might also have cost estimators involved early on, specification writers who detail the quality standards for materials and work.
Spec writers. Okay.
Suppliers and product reps giving input on materials. Code consultants making sure everything complies. Geotechnical engineers analyzing the soil.
Wow.
Landscape designers for the outside spaces. Maybe even IT and audiovisual specialists, depending on the building's use. That's quite a list.
It's like assembling a highly specialized design dream team. Okay, that brings us to the third primary team. The contractors. What's their main role in all this?
Right, the contractors team. Their main role is, well, to actually construct the project.
The builders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They take the contract, documents those drawings and specifications from the designers, and turn them into a physical reality.
And the chapter mentions different types, GCs and specialty contractors.
Yes. You have general contractors, or GCs, who typically oversee the entire construction process. And then you have specialty, or trade contractors, who focus on specific parts of the work.
Like plumbers, electricians.
Precisely. Concrete, framing, roofing, drywall, painting, all those specific trades.
Right.
Now, historically, GCs used to do a lot of that work themselves with their own crews. That's called self-performing.
But that's changed.
It has, quite a bit. Nowadays, especially on larger or more complex projects, GCs tend to hire subcontractors for most, if not all, of the specific trade work.
Why is that? Why subcontract it out?
Well, those subcontractors are specialists because they focus just on, say, electrical work. They're usually very efficient, have highly skilled crews for that specific task, and own all the specialized equipment needed.
So it's often more efficient and maybe even higher quality to use subs?
Often, yes.
Yeah.
The GC acts more like a manager and coordinator in that scenario, overseeing all the different subcontractors.
And there can be layers of subs.
There can. You have first-tier subcontractors who are hired directly by the GC. But then, that electrical subcontractor might hire a second-tier sub who specializes just in fire alarm systems, for example.
Ah, okay. Subcontract.
Right. But no matter how many tiers there are, the general contractor remains ultimately responsible to the owner for all the work performed by everyone they hired. The buck stops with the GC.
Got it. The chapter also mentions means and methods. What exactly does that refer to?
That's a really key distinction. The contractor is generally responsible for deciding how the project gets built.
The how.
Yes, the specific techniques, the sequence of work, the procedures, the equipment they'll use, those are the means and methods, and that's the contractor's domain.
So the designer says what needs to be built.
Exactly. The scope of work is defined in the contractor. The drawings and specs tell you what to build. For instance, build a brick wall of this height, this thickness, using this type of brick.
And the contractor decides.
The contractor decides the best way to actually do that. Which mortar mix to use, what kind of scaffolding, the specific pattern for laying the bricks, the tools their crew needs. That's the means and methods.
That makes sense. They're the experts in the actual building process, so they figure out the best way to execute the design.
Precisely.
So what are some of the main day-to-day responsibilities of the general contractor during the construction phase? They seem to have the most direct control then.
They really do have the greatest day-to-day responsibility once construction is underway,
Yeah.
beyond just making sure all the physical work meets the contract requirements.
Quality control.
Right. They're also in charge of managing the costs and keeping the project on schedule. That's huge.
A budget and timeline again.
Constantly managing those.
Mm.
They handle payments to their subcontractors and suppliers, deal with any changes or modifications to the original contract change orders, they're called. They're usually responsible for getting all the necessary building permits, coordinating all the required testing and inspections with those outside agencies we'll talk about later. It's a lot.
It really is. And who are the key members you typically find on the GC's team structure?
Well, it's usually led by an executive from the construction company itself. Then, reporting to them, you'll almost always have a project manager.
What's the PM's focus?
The project manager, or PM, usually handles more of the business and administrative side of things. Contract compliance, writing and managing the subcontracts, processing payments, change orders.
The paperwork side.
A lot of it, yeah. And they're often the main point of contact with the owner and the design team for contractual and financial matters.
Okay, who's actually on the site managing the work?
That's typically the superintendent, They are based on the construction site full-time.
The boots on the ground.
Exactly. They're responsible for coordinating all the subcontractors, overseeing the daily production activities, scheduling the work crews, managing site logistics, and crucially, ensuring job site safety.
Safety's huge.
Paramount. Then, under the superintendent, you'll have foremen.
Foreman.
Yeah, foremen directly supervise the actual crews of workers, the carpenters, the electricians, etc., for a specific trade, whether they work for the GC directly or for a subcontractor.
Okay. Any other roles?
You'll often have support staff, too, like field engineers or project engineers. They assist both the PM and the superintendent with things like interpreting drawings, managing documents, tracking progress, communication between parties, maybe processing invoices.
The support crew.
Right. And some larger GC teams might also include value engineers who specifically look for ways to build things more cost-effectively without sacrificing quality, and estimators who are likely involved in preparing the initial bid for the project.
Gotcha. Now, the chapter also touched on licensing for contractors. Why is that important? Why do they need licenses?
Licensing is primarily there to protect the public health, safety, general welfare. Most states have laws requiring contractors, both the general ones and often those in specialized trades like plumbing or electrical, to be licensed to operate legally.
And how do they get licensed?
The specific requirements vary quite a bit from state to state, but it often involve things like passing an examination to prove competence, demonstrating a certain number of years of experience, and sometimes needing to provide proof of insurance or even a surety bond, which is like a financial guarantee.
So it ensures some basic level of competence and accountability.
That's the idea. And the type and financial value of the project often determine what kind of license is needed. Building a skyscraper might require a different license than building a single-family home.
Right, different levels of complexity and risk. Now, what about construction managers or CMs? The chapter mentioned them. How do they fit into this picture? Are they GCs?
Sometimes, but not always. Construction managers, or CMs, are a bit different. They're often hired by the owner much earlier in the process, sometimes even during the design phase.
Earlier than the GC.
Typically, yes. They act as the owner's advocate and advisor throughout the whole project lifecycle.
What kind of advice do they give?
They provide really valuable input on things like the project budget, helping to keep the design realistic, and the constructability of the design.
Constructability, meaning?
Meaning they review the plans from a builder's perspective to make sure they're practical, efficient, and cost-effective to actually build and then operate long-term. They look for potential problems or cost savings early on.
Ah, so they try to catch issues before construction even starts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can also help the owner manage the bidding process and select the contractor. Now, in some delivery methods, the CM might also then act as the general contractor who holds the subcontracts.
Okay.
But in other models, like CM agency, they remain purely as the owner's advisor, and the owner holds separate contracts with the GC or even multiple prime contractors. Their early involvement, though, can potentially save the owner significant time and money down the road.
Okay, that clarifies the CM role. So we've looked at the three main teams, owner, designer, contractor, CM. What about the legal connections, the contracts between them all? How does that web look?
Typically, the owner will have two primary separate contracts, one with the designer, the architect-engineer,
Okay.
and one with the general contractor or maybe the construction manager, depending on the setup.
So owner, designer, owner, contractor, two main links.
Right. Then, flowing from those, the designer will have their own separate contracts with their various consultants, the structural engineer, the mechanical engineer, etc.
Okay, the designer hires their own team.
Correct. And similarly, the general contractor will have contracts with all of their subcontractors, the plumber, the electrician, the roofer.
So the GC hires their team.
Exactly. So the GC is the one who pays the subcontractors, manages their work, and is ultimately responsible to the owner for making sure that work meets the overall contract requirements.
That makes sense. And the chapter clarified some terms there too, right?
Yep.
Prime contractor versus subcontractor.
Yes. It's a useful distinction. A prime contractor is simply any contractor who has a direct contract with the owner.
So the GC is usually a prime contractor.
Usually, yes. But sometimes an owner might hire, say, an electrical contractor directly for a specific part of the job alongside the GC. In that case, both the GC and the electrical contractor would be considered prime contractors.
Ah, okay. And subcontractors.
A subcontractor is anyone who has a contract with another contractor, not directly with the owner. So those specialty trade contractors hired by the GC, they're subcontractors. And the fire alarm company hired by the electrical sub, they're a second-tier subcontractor.
Got it. That clears up the contractual web. Now, the chapter also talked about other important players. It's not just those three teams operating in a vacuum, right? Who else gets involved?
Absolutely not. There's a whole broader ecosystem supporting a construction project. First up, and really important, are the regulatory agents.
The rule enforcers.
Basically, yes.
Sure.
They're often referred to as authorities having jurisdiction, or AHJS.
AHJS, okay.
These are the various government agencies that enforce all the rules, building codes, zoning laws, environmental regulations, safety standards. Can be local, state, sometimes federal.
Like the city building department.
Exactly. City or county building department is a big one. Could also be the local health department, the state fire marshal, maybe federal agencies like OSHA for workplace safety, or the EPA for environmental stuff. Even the local fire department often has a say.
What do they do in the project?
They typically review the project plans before construction starts to ensure they comply with codes. They issue the necessary permits. You can't build without permits.
Right.
And then they conduct inspections during construction at various milestones and a final inspection at the end. They're the ones who issue that all-important certificate of occupancy, or C of O.
And you need that to legally use the building.
You absolutely do. It signifies the building is safe and meets code. So AHJs are critical players.
Okay, who else is in this other players category?
Then you have manufacturers, product representatives, and material suppliers.
The people who make and sell the stuff.
But pretty much. They provide crucial information during the design phase to help the architects and engineers select the right products, windows, insulation, lighting fixtures, whatever.
Okay.
And then, of course, they're the ones who actually supply all those physical building materials and products to the contractors and subcontractors during construction.
What else do they offer?
Well, reps can offer detailed cost data, technical assistance, advice on the best way to install their products, maybe even training for the workers. They also provide that key documentation we mentioned earlier, the submittals.
Right, the shop drawings and data sheets.
Yep, that the design team needs to review and approve before the contractor can install the product. So they're vital links in the chain.
Makes sense. You need the people who create and supply the physical components. What about ensuring the quality of the work as it's being done?
That's where testing and inspecting agencies often come in.
Are these different from the AHJ inspectors?
Yes, usually. These are often independent third-party companies hired sometimes by the owner, sometimes by the GC specifically, to verify that certain materials and workmanship meet the quality standards set out in the contract documents and by regulations.
Like testing concrete strength.
Exactly. That's a classic example. They might take concrete samples on site and test them in a lab, or test the compaction of soil, or inspect welding quality. They verify compliance using standardized tests, often based on criteria set by organizations like ASTM International.
ASTM. Okay. So they provide independent quality verification.
Yeah.
Good. And I remember reading about commissioning agents. What specific role do they play? That sounds kind of specialized.
It is, and it's becoming increasingly important. Commissioning agents, or CXAs, are focused specifically on ensuring that all the building's complex systems work correctly and efficiently, as designed.
Systems like
Electrical, lighting, plumbing, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, HVAC, fire protection, building automation systems, even the building envelope itself, windows, roof, insulation.
making sure it all works together properly.
Precisely. Ideally, the owner hires the commissioning agent early, during the design phase. They help set performance goals for the systems, review the design documents from an operational perspective, monitor the installation during construction, oversee functional testing, and help develop the manuals for operating and maintaining the systems properly after handover.
What's the main goal of commissioning?
The ultimate goal is usually to improve energy efficiency, lower the building's operating costs over its lifetime, reduce equipment problems, and ensure the comfort and satisfaction of the people actually using the building.
Sounds pretty valuable. Is it common?
It's becoming much more common, and it's even required now by many energy codes like in California and New York, and for green building certifications like LB.
Okay, so they're like the system optimizers. Good to know. And finally, the chapter mentions one more group. Users. Who are they in this context?
The users are, quite simply, the people who will ultimately occupy or use the finished facility.
The end customer, basically.
Exactly. It could be the owners themselves living in the house, or tenants working in the office building, students and faculty in the school, doctors and patients in the hospital, or even the general public using a park, a plaza, or a library.
And how are they involved?
Well, they might not be directly involved in the day-to-day construction meetings, but their needs, their comfort, their safety, how well the building functions for them, that's the entire reason the project exists in the first place. Their perspective is ultimately the most important one.
Wow, okay. So it really is a much broader and more interconnected world than just thinking about the owner, architect, and contractor. It's like this complex, temporary ecosystem built around achieving one single specific goal.
Absolutely. And that's a really key takeaway from the source material, I think. Construction projects are this incredibly complex orchestration. You've got numerous individuals, multiple teams, all with very specific roles and responsibilities,
Yeah.
all needing to work together, communicate constantly under the guidance of project management principles, just to achieve that shared objective, that final building or structure.
It really makes you think. Consider the next time you see a construction project underway, that fence, the equipment, the workers. You now have a much deeper understanding, hopefully, of that hidden network of expertise and coordination required just to bring it to life.
It's easy to take the built environment for granted.
Totally. It makes me wonder what other behind-the-scenes processes in our daily lives might be equally intricate. Maybe we could explore the world of global supply chains sometime, or how complex software gets developed. Might be interesting for a future deep dive.
That's a fascinating point. Yeah, it really does make you appreciate how much unseen effort goes into creating the infrastructure and the buildings we use every single day. A lot goes into it.
Well, if you listening found this exploration fascinating, maybe share it with someone else who might be curious about how the world around them gets built. And as always, if you have your own set of sources you'd like us to unpack, please let us know. We're always ready for the next deep dive.